Marcus Williams strutted through the main gate of Naval Base San Diego, with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him respect. At 35, he had built a successful construction company by being loud, demanding, and never backing down from anyone. His expensive suit and gold watch caught the morning sunlight as he approached the security checkpoint, already irritated that he had to go through what he considered unnecessary procedures. The base was buzzing with activity as personnel moved with purpose across the sprawling facility. Marcus had been contracted to oversee renovations to several administrative buildings, a job worth millions that he had won through aggressive bidding and political connections. He had never worked on a military installation before, but he figured authority was authority, and he had never met anyone he couldn't intimidate or charm into submission. At the security station, a young woman in military fatigue stood checking identification cards and directing visitors. She appeared to be in her late 20s with short auburn hair neatly tucked under her cap and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in every detail. Her uniform was crisp and professional, but Marcus barely glanced at her face, instead focusing on what he perceived as just another obstacle between him and his business. "Papers," she said simply, extending her hand without looking up from her clipboard. Marcus rolled his eyes dramatically and pulled out his contractor credentials with exaggerated slowness. "Listen, sweetheart, I'm here on important business. Multi-million-dollar contract. Maybe you could speed this up a little? I've got real work to do, not stand around playing soldier games." The woman took his papers and began reviewing them methodically. Marcus tapped his expensive Italian leather shoes impatiently on the concrete, sighing loudly and checking his Rolex with theatrical gestures. Several other personnel moved through adjacent checkpoints efficiently, but he felt singled out by what he assumed was incompetence. "You know," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the area, "back in the real world, customer service actually means something. When someone's bringing in the kind of money I'm bringing to this place, they usually get treated with a little respect. Maybe they should have someone qualified handling the important visitors instead of having the secretary play dress-up." The guard continued her inspection without acknowledging his comments, which only fueled Marcus's growing irritation. He had built his reputation on being the alpha in every room, the guy who got things done by making sure everyone knew who was in charge. This quiet professionalism felt like disrespect to him. "Are you even listening to me?" Marcus raised his voice, causing several nearby personnel to glance in their direction. "I said I'm here on business. Real business. The kind that pays for this whole operation. The least you could do is pretend you understand what that means." The woman finally looked up at him, her expression completely neutral. "Sir, I need to verify these credentials through the system. It will take approximately 3 more minutes. Please wait here." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls of the checkpoint area. 3 minutes? For what? Running my name through some computer? Lady, I could buy and sell half the people on this base. I've got meetings with colonels and captains waiting for me. You think they want to hear that their contractor got held up by someone who probably couldn't get a real job? He gestured dismissively at her uniform, his voice dripping with condescension. "I mean, come on. What are you, like 5'0"? What exactly are you guarding this place from? Strongly worded letters? Maybe you should stick to filing paperwork and let the actual soldiers handle security." The guard's expression remained completely unchanged as she continued typing into her computer terminal. Her composure was professional and unshakable, which only seemed to aggravate Marcus further. He was accustomed to getting reactions from people, whether fear, anger, or submission. This calm efficiency felt like mockery to his inflated ego. Around them, the base continued its normal operations. Military vehicles moved through the larger gates. Personnel walked with purpose toward various buildings, and the distant sounds of training exercises could be heard from other parts of the facility. But Marcus was completely focused on what he perceived as a personal slight, his frustration growing with each passing second of professional silence from the guard. The sound of synchronized footsteps echoed across the concrete as a group of 6 men approached the security checkpoint. Marcus, still muttering complaints about military inefficiency, barely glanced in their direction until their commanding presence became impossible to ignore. These weren't ordinary servicemen making their way through routine base activities. Each man moved with the fluid precision of a predator, their bearing radiating confidence and capability in a way that made the air around them feel different. Their uniforms were immaculate but somehow different from the standard military dress Marcus had seen throughout the base. These men carried themselves like coiled springs, ready for action at any moment. The lead figure was a mountain of a man, easily 6.5 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to stretch his uniform to its limits. His face was weathered and serious, marked by years of experiences that Marcus couldn't begin to imagine. Behind him, 5 other men maintained perfect formation, their eyes constantly scanning their environment, with the kind of situational awareness that spoke of extensive training and real-world application. Marcus's complaints died in his throat as he watched them approach. Something about these men was fundamentally different from the other military personnel he had encountered. They moved like a unit, each step coordinated, their silence somehow more commanding than any words could have been. As they drew closer to the security station, Marcus noticed the patches and insignia on their uniforms. Even with his limited military knowledge, he recognized enough symbols to understand that these weren't regular Navy personnel. The trident emblems, the specific way they carried themselves, the intensity in their eyes, everything about them screamed elite forces. The guard at the security station had noticed their approach as well, but her reaction was subtle. Marcus caught a slight straightening in her posture, a small adjustment that suggested recognition and respect, though her professional demeanor remained unchanged. The massive leader of the group reached the security checkpoint and stopped precisely 3 feet from the desk. His eyes, steel gray and unforgiving, took in the scene quickly. Marcus, still holding his visitor badge and wearing an expression of entitled irritation, the guard maintaining her professional stance, and the general atmosphere of tension that Marcus's behavior had created. "Ma'am," the large man said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The single word somehow contained more respect than all of Marcus's verbose complaints had shown disrespect. Marcus found himself studying these newcomers more carefully, trying to understand why their presence felt so significant. Their equipment was different, their bearing was different, and the way other base personnel seemed to notice and defer to them suggested they held positions of considerable importance within the military hierarchy. The guard acknowledged the group with a professional nod, but Marcus noticed something he had missed before. There was a mutual recognition between her and these elite soldiers, a subtle communication that suggested shared experiences or understanding that went beyond standard military courtesy. "Gentlemen," she responded, her voice carrying the same calm professionalism she had maintained throughout Marcus's tirade, but with an underlying tone that suggested these men represented something different, something worthy of genuine respect rather than mere procedural courtesy. Marcus realized he was witnessing an interaction between military personnel who clearly operated on a level far above the routine base activities he had assumed represented the peak of military capability. These men moved and spoke with the confidence of individuals who had proven themselves in ways that his construction site bravado could never match. The lead figure's gaze moved briefly to Marcus, taking in his expensive suit, his visitor badge, and his obviously civilian status. There was no hostility in that look, but there was an assessment, a quick evaluation that Marcus found unsettling. He had built his career on being able to read people and situations, but these men operated according to rules and standards he didn't understand. The tension in the air was palpable as Marcus realized he had stumbled into a situation that was about to become very different from his expectations. The routine security checkpoint encounter he had been dominating through sheer volume and persistence was about to transform into something else entirely, something that would challenge every assumption he had made about military personnel and his own position in the social hierarchy of the naval base. Marcus's patience, never his strong suit, had completely evaporated. He stepped closer to the security desk, his voice rising to ensure everyone in the vicinity could hear his displeasure. "You know what? This is exactly what's wrong with government jobs. No accountability, no customer service, no understanding of how the real world works." He pointed an accusatory finger at the guard, who continued working at her computer with the same steady professionalism she had maintained throughout his tirade. "In my business, if someone treated a client like this, they'd be fired before lunch. But I guess when taxpayers are footing the bill, efficiency doesn't matter, does it?" A few enlisted personnel had begun to gather at a respectful distance, some appearing uncomfortable with the civilians' loud complaints, others simply curious about the commotion. Marcus noticed the audience and seemed to feed off their attention, his voice growing even more theatrical. I'm starting to think this whole operation is a joke, Marcus continued, gesturing broadly at the military infrastructure around them. They've got someone who looks like she should be serving coffee running security for a major naval installation. What's next? Letting kindergartners plan military operations? The guard finally finished her computer work and picked up a phone, dialing a short extension. Base operations, this is Gate 7. I have contractor Marcus Williams here for building renovation project Bravo 77. Requesting confirmation of clearance status. She listened briefly, then hung up. Really? Marcus threw his hands up in exasperation. Now you're calling your supervisor because you can't figure out how to read a simple contractor badge? This is unbelievable. I've worked on projects for senators, governors, Fortune 500 CEOs, and none of them required this level of incompetence. The guard reached under her desk and pulled out a temporary visitor badge, beginning to fill out paperwork with a pen. Marcus interpreted this as vindication of his aggressive approach and pressed his advantage. Finally, he said loudly enough for everyone around to hear, "See? All it took was making sure someone understood the situation. Maybe next time listen when important people are talking to you instead of playing whatever game that was." As she wrote, Marcus decided to drive his point home further. And another thing, maybe they should consider putting someone qualified in this position. Someone who actually looks like they could handle real security issues. I mean, seriously, what are you going to do if there's actual trouble? Ask the bad guys to wait while you call for backup? He turned slightly to address his unwilling audience of military personnel. Can you believe this? They've got Barbie running security at a military base. What's the height requirement here anyway? 4 feet? Must make it easier to hire anyone who can fog a mirror. The guard finished filling out his temporary badge and attached it to a lanyard, setting it on the counter between them. Her movements remained precise and professional, showing no reaction to his increasingly personal attacks. "Mr. Williams," she said in the same calm voice she had used throughout the encounter, "your temporary access badge is ready. Please wear it visibly at all times while on base. Your escort will arrive shortly to take you to Building Complex C for your meeting with the project coordinators." Marcus snatched the badge from the counter with obvious irritation. "Escort? Nobody said anything about needing a babysitter. I'm perfectly capable of finding my own way around. Just point me in the right direction and I'll handle it myself." Base regulations require all civilian contractors to be escorted during their first visit. The guard replied evenly. "Your escort should arrive within 5 minutes." 5 more minutes? Marcus's voice reached a new level of indignation. "This is ridiculous. I could have been halfway done with my meeting by now if this place had any idea how to operate efficiently. This is exactly why private sector always outperforms government operations." He began pacing back and forth in front of the security station, continuing his monologue about military incompetence while the guard returned to processing other personnel who had arrived. Marcus felt completely justified in his behavior, convinced that his aggressive approach had finally gotten results and that the quiet guard had been properly put in her place. The massive leader stepped forward with deliberate precision, his steel gray eyes locking onto the guard's face with unmistakable recognition. In one fluid motion that seemed to happen in slow motion, he brought his right hand up in a crisp, perfect salute. His 5 teammates immediately followed suit, their movements synchronized like a precision drill team. "Major," the leader said, his deep voice carrying across the checkpoint area with absolute authority and genuine respect. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Major. The woman he had spent the last 15 minutes belittling, mocking and dismissing as incompetent was a major in the United States military. The implications crashed over him in waves as his mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. The guard, the major, returned their salutes with the same professional precision she had maintained throughout his entire tirade. "Gentlemen," she acknowledged, her voice carrying new weight now that Marcus understood her actual rank and position. Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment and growing fear as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. A major wasn't some entry-level soldier playing dress-up as he had so loudly proclaimed. A major was a field-grade officer, someone who had spent years earning respect through competence, leadership, and service. Someone who commanded troops and made decisions that affected people's lives. The 6 elite soldiers maintained their formation, but Marcus could feel their attention shifting toward him. He didn't need to look directly at them to sense their awareness of his presence and his behavior. These men had undoubtedly heard at least part of his disrespectful commentary, and their protective stance around their officer was becoming increasingly apparent. Major Thompson, the lead soldier continued, "We're heading out for the training exercise. Wanted to check if you needed anything before we ship out." Major Thompson. Even her name carried authority now that Marcus understood who she actually was. He thought back to every insult he had hurled at her, every dismissive comment about her competence, every suggestion that she wasn't qualified for her position. The memory of his words made his stomach churn with dread. "Thank you, Chief," Major Thompson replied. "Everything's running smoothly here. Have a productive exercise, Chief." Marcus's knowledge of military ranks was limited, but he knew enough to understand that these weren't ordinary soldiers. The man addressing Major Thompson was a chief petty officer, likely a SEAL team leader based on the insignia Marcus was now desperately trying to decipher. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The woman he had spent 15 minutes treating like an incompetent clerk was not only a major but someone who commanded enough respect from elite Navy SEALs that they stopped to check on her welfare before heading out on operations. Marcus tried to make himself smaller, hoping somehow to become invisible as the full weight of his situation became clear. He was a civilian contractor who had publicly humiliated a field-grade officer in front of elite military personnel. Every word he had spoken, every gesture he had made, every assumption he had voiced had been wrong in the worst possible way. The chief's eyes moved deliberately to Marcus, taking in his expensive suit, his visitor badge, and his obviously uncomfortable demeanor. There was no need for words. The message was clear. We heard everything, we saw everything, and we understand exactly what happened here. "Sir," the chief said, addressing Marcus directly for the first time. The word "sir" carried no respect, only the bare minimum of military courtesy required when addressing a civilian. "I hope you found everything you need here at our facility." The emphasis on "our facility" was unmistakable. This wasn't just a workplace to these men. It was their domain, their responsibility, their home. And Marcus had violated the sanctity of that space by disrespecting one of their officers. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His usual confidence and verbal aggression had completely abandoned him. He was facing 6 of the most elite soldiers in the world, men who had earned their positions through years of the most demanding training and real-world operations, and he had just been exposed as someone who had spent a quarter hour insulting their major. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Marcus realized that his entire worldview had just been shattered. His assumptions about authority, competence, and respect had been completely wrong, and now he was standing in the center of a military base, surrounded by people who understood exactly what kind of person he had revealed himself to be. The chief stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that Marcus could see the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in harsh conditions most people could never imagine. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, but carried an underlying steel that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You know, sir," the chief began, his tone conversational but loaded with meaning. "Major Thompson here graduated top of her class from West Point. She served 2 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Bronze Star for Valor, and completed Ranger School before transferring to Navy Operations Coordination." Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Each word the chief spoke was like a hammer blow, emphasizing just how catastrophically wrong his assumptions had been. A Bronze Star, Ranger School, West Point. These weren't just credentials. They were achievements that required levels of courage, intelligence, and dedication that Marcus had never possessed. "She's personally coordinated operations that saved American lives," the chief continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "She's jumped out of perfectly good airplanes in the middle of the night, led soldiers through combat zones, and made split-second decisions under pressure that most people couldn't handle on their best day." The other 5 SEALs had positioned themselves subtly but deliberately around the area, not threatening but creating an unmistakable sense of presence. Marcus was surrounded by men who lived in a world where respect was earned through actions, not demanded through volume and bluster. Major Thompson remained at her station, continuing her duties with the same professional composure she had maintained throughout the entire encounter. But Marcus could see her differently now. The calm under pressure wasn't incompetence. It was the result of training and experience in situations where panic could mean death. Her measured responses weren't slowness. They were the careful precision of someone accustomed to making decisions that mattered. The Major also holds master's degrees in engineering and strategic studies. Another SEAL added quietly. She designs the security protocols that keep this base safe. The procedures you've been complaining about? She wrote them. Marcus realized that everything he had, interpreted as bureaucratic inefficiency, was actually carefully designed security architecture created by someone far more qualified than he could ever hope to be. The thorough credential checking, the systematic processes, the careful verification, all of it was the work of a trained professional protecting a vital military installation. "Sir," the chief said, his voice dropping even lower, "in our line of work, we depend on officers like Major Thompson. When we're out there putting our lives on the line, we need to know that people with her level of competence and dedication are handling the details that keep us safe." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus understood that he wasn't just being corrected. He was being educated about a world where competence meant the difference between life and death, where respect was earned through sacrifice and service, where the quiet professionals who did their jobs correctly were the difference between success and catastrophe. Marcus tried to speak, to offer some kind of apology or explanation, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry for revealing himself to be exactly the kind of person who judged others by appearance, rather than ability? That he regretted demonstrating his complete ignorance about military service and sacrifice? "I think," the chief said, glancing at his teammates and then back at Marcus, "that maybe you owe Major Thompson an apology. A real one. The kind that acknowledges you were completely wrong about everything you assumed." The suggestion wasn't really a suggestion. It was a command delivered with the kind of quiet authority that Marcus had never encountered in his business dealings. These men weren't asking for his compliance. They were informing him of what was going to happen next. Marcus looked at Major Thompson, who was still maintaining her professional demeanor, despite having endured 15 minutes of personal attacks on her competence, qualifications, and worth. She had remained calm and professional, while he had made himself look foolish. And now he understood that her restraint hadn't been weakness. It had been the discipline of a trained officer dealing with a situation beneath her pay grade. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and Marcus realized that his entire approach to life, dominating through volume, demanding respect through intimidation, judging people by superficial characteristics, had just been exposed as fundamentally hollow when confronted with real authority based on genuine competence and sacrifice. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he approached Major Thompson's desk. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. The weight of 6 pairs of elite military eyes on his back made each step feel like a walk to judgment. When he reached the security station, he struggled to find words adequate for the magnitude of his mistake. "Major Thompson," he began, his voice barely above a whisper compared to the booming complaints he had been making minutes earlier. "I owe you a sincere apology. I was completely wrong about everything. Your service, your qualifications, your competence. I had no right to speak to you the way I did." Major Thompson looked up from her paperwork, her green eyes meeting his directly. There was no anger there, no satisfaction at his obvious discomfort. Just the same professional assessment she had maintained throughout their entire interaction. "I disrespected not only you personally, but your service to our country," Marcus continued, each word feeling inadequate. "You've earned your rank and position through sacrifice and dedication that I clearly don't understand. I was completely out of line and I'm deeply sorry." The chief nodded approvingly, but Marcus could tell this was just the beginning of a learning experience that would stay with him forever. Major Thompson accepted his apology with the same grace she had handled his insults, simply nodding and returning to her duties. An escort arrived shortly after, a young corporal who treated Major Thompson with obvious respect and addressed Marcus with polite but distant professionalism. As they walked toward the building complex, Marcus found himself seeing the base through completely different eyes. Every person they passed moved with purpose and competence. The young sailors he had dismissed as inexperienced were maintaining equipment worth millions of dollars. The administrative personnel he had assumed were paper pushers were coordinating logistics for operations he couldn't begin to understand. The entire base functioned like a precision instrument, and he had been too arrogant to recognize the skill and dedication required to make it work. During his meetings with the project coordinators, Word of his encounter with Major Thompson had already spread through the military grapevine. The officers he met with were professionally courteous but maintained a coolness that made it clear his reputation had preceded him. His usual aggressive negotiation tactics felt not only inappropriate, but embarrassingly juvenile in this environment. The construction project proceeded, but Marcus found himself fundamentally changed by the experience. He made a point of learning about military rank structure, studying the backgrounds of the personnel he worked with, and treating every service member with the respect their position and sacrifice demanded. Months later, when the renovation project was completed, Marcus requested a final meeting with Major Thompson. He brought with him a donation check for a veterans organization, along with a letter thanking her for the lesson in humility and respect that had changed his perspective on service and leadership. Major Thompson accepted both graciously, noting that the best apologies were demonstrated through changed behavior, rather than just words. She had seen many civilians struggle to understand military culture, but few who were willing to learn from their mistakes and grow from the experience. Marcus left the naval base that final day as a different man than the one who had arrived months earlier, full of bluster and false confidence. He had learned that true authority came from competence and service rather than volume and intimidation. He had discovered that respect was earned through actions rather than demanded through aggression. The encounter with Major Thompson and her SEALs became a story he would tell for years, though never as a humorous anecdote. Instead, it became a reminder of the day he learned the difference between superficial authority and genuine leadership, between demanding respect and earning it, between judging by appearances and recognizing true competence. He never again made assumptions about someone's qualifications based on their appearance, and he never forgot that behind every uniform was a person who had chosen to serve something greater than themselves. The lesson had been expensive for his pride, but invaluable for his character. In the end, Major Thompson's quiet professionalism had taught him more about leadership than all his years of business success combined.